also have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Laura Tortorelli. She is an associate professor of elementary literacy at Michigan State, whose research focuses on improving reading and writing instruction through evidence-based practices. And you can see that bio up there on the screen, as well as the connections that her session will have for the other work in our that we experience in our field. I do want to name I've had the opportunity to work with her throughout the last year very closely, and you can't ask for a better researcher to work with except for we've got a great team of researchers, so the whole team, and Laura has just been amazing, and so I just want to welcome her up on the stage. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I've lost my clicker. Here we go. Thank you. All right. Hi, everybody. Well, welcome. Welcome back. Go green. Excellent. Good to see you all here. So I am so excited to share with you the work that I have gotten to do with a fantastic team, as Heather mentioned, over the past year we're updating the 4 or 5 essentials and really thinking about what this means for our classroom instruction in grades 4 and 5. So I want to say that some of you have already participated in our trainings around the new 4 or 5 essentials, and some of you have, and many of you, if not all of you, have gotten sort of the big overview of the changes and the essentials that we did online back in December. But this is going to be a little bit different. This is going to be thinking about the research that underlie those changes and really thinking about what that means for our coaching this year. And I was so excited to engage in this work with both Dr. Miranda Fitzgerald and Dr. John Strong. And so I'm going to try to do justice to our shared work today. So let me see if I can get my clicker to work. And one of the things that I loved about this work is that I got to kind of encapsulated and culminated all of the different strands of my research that I have engaged in since I began my doctoral program at UVA almost 15 years ago. I started with an interest in text complexity and how that affected literacy assessment. And then I got into early foundational reading and writing skills and the best ways to support those. And then, as you know, I've talked to you all about this, I sort of ended up following students who were impacted by missed instruction in the early grades as they went up through the upper grades, and I became very, very interested in those kids who had missed instruction or needed additional instruction in foundational skills in the upper grades. So I see myself as sort of following the children and following that foundational skills development over time. And now I'm very engaged in work around digital and AI-generated texts and how those can hopefully promote foundational skills over time. So in some ways, this is a culmination of everything that I've been working on. And I wanted to start with some big picture thoughts. I don't know how many of you know the Teaching Literacy podcast, Jake Downs' podcast. It's an excellent podcast. I'm on the most recent episode, and I caught myself saying, Vygotsky has a lot to answer for. And now that I've said it on a podcast, I guess I can say it here too. I want us to, back in the 1970s, Vygotsky came up with this very excellent sociocultural model of reading, of instruction, where we slice and dice the things that we want kids to do into these different levels, right? There's this independent level, which stuff they can already do, frustration level, which is stuff that is too hard, and then this zone of proximal development, where working is productive, where they can actually support learning. And I find, and some people have read Vygotsky and are familiar with this model. Even if you're not, you're probably familiar with its downstream effects. So when I first got into the field and started doing research, this is what was happening, right? We thought that the zone of proximal development was about matching kids to the perfect text that would be just the right level of difficulty, and that was what we needed to do. And I'm very glad that we have moved away from that. A lot of my early research was about trying to get people to move away from that. But what I want us to think about today is what the zone of proximal development really is, and what the cutting edge research that has been happening, especially in grades 4 and 5, can tell us about what should be happening in that zone. So what that zone is for grades 4 and 5, if not all grades, but definitely for those grades, is actually figuring out how we can scaffold students to read grade level texts and get sufficient reading practice to become proficient readers so that they can enter the secondary grades prepared to do the work that they're going to do, as well as reading for pleasure and learning about everything that they might want to learn. So the whole point, I think we missed the point. Vygotsky missed the point. Oh, no, not Vygotsky. It wasn't his fault. But we missed the point of the ZPD. The ZPD is supposed to be hard, and what's supposed to be supporting kids in learning is the scaffolding and the instructional practice built around the tasks that we're giving them that are a little bit too hard. We're not supposed to be giving them things that they can already do without our assistance, because otherwise they don't need us. So everything we're going to talk about today is going to be about that, and I want you to keep that in mind. When we're talking about 4 or 5 in particular, we are talking, I realized I have an ear mic, I don't need this. Sorry, just pushing that out of the way. So we're talking about 4 or 5 in particular. We're talking about a really important developmental stage. We've spent a lot of time in this network, and I've been here with you the whole, not the whole time, I mean, since 2016, talking about these component skills and how we can develop them, particularly these word recognition skills. I was here talking about the K3 essentials 4 and 5 at the very beginning, and those are really, really important. But when we're talking about models of reading development or Scarborough's reading rope or that kind of thing, we're almost always talking about the strands. But what happens over time, if you look at her model, it says there are these 2 little arrows. It's increasingly strategic and increasingly automatic. And our kids that we're talking about today, the 4 or 5s, they are in the places where the strands are braiding together and everything is becoming increasingly strategic and increasingly automatic. We need to focus on those component skills, but we also need to focus on how they are integrating to support skilled reading, because this is where the rope is actually being made. Similarly, I love to talk about Ehri's phases of development. I spent a lot of time in our early coaching network sessions talking about the first 3 phases, how to move kids who are not using letters to think and letters and sounds to starting to use some letters and sounds, how to recognize words, how to move kids who are using some letters and sounds to recognize words, to using all of the letters and sounds in a word to be able to fully phonemically segment a word and pay attention to all the letter-sound correspondences and in that full alphabetic phase. The kids, we sort of act like we can just drop kids off there and nothing else happens. But actually, a lot of really awesome stuff happens when kids move from that full alphabetic stage into the consolidated alphabetic stage. So you've heard me talk about this before. You know I love Ehri. But in the consolidated alphabetic stage, these are kids who have full phonemic awareness and are able to have all those component skills, are able to read words letter by letter and sound by sound. But they also have a personal lexicon of words that they know because they've read them and written them so many times before, and they're able to draw on that resource as an additional resource for reading new words. And so kids in this consolidated phase are really doing different work. They're still learning to read and reading to learn, both of those things, but they're really starting to they're able to use the words that they know to learn new words, which means they're able to use larger word parts. They're able to use morphological parts. They're able to use to read compound words, read inflected versions of the same word, and they're able to read by analogy based on the words that they already know. And so we're going to talk about that. Everything we're going to talk about today is what these kids in this consolidated alphabetic phase need to keep moving forward with their literacy development. Does anybody listen to Mike Duncan's Revolutions podcast? Anybody? All right, my son made me listen to all 10 seasons, and I finally got to the end of the Russian Revolution series, and the last episode, it's about like 113 episodes or something, is about Lenin's death, and what Mike Duncan says is, yeah, Lenin died, but things just kept happening. Right? And history never ends. And I would say that that's how research feels sometimes. Research just keeps happening. Research never ends. So there's always new and important things we have to incorporate into our work. And I'm so, so glad to be in a state where that work is always ongoing and happening, where we're always trying to improve things and do better. We have amazing state-level initiatives. We have support from the governor's office, from MDE, and from MAISA. And so we're going to be able to talk about some really great new research, just a taste of all that great research today and how we can move forward. However, I do want to highlight that while we've done a ton of work and a lot of great things are happening, research never ends. We're not done, right? So we have a lot of great curricular resources in place, but that is not going to be enough, right? That's the beginning. Teachers need high quality research, curricular materials, but they also need how to use them. And no curriculum is perfect. So this is the beginning, not the end of the journey, and that's where the literacy essentials come in. They are a list of evidence-based practices that we know are appropriate for kids in these grade levels that they need to grow in their literacy every day. So it's not a program or a curriculum. It's not supposed to compete with your program or curricular materials, but instead it's supposed to be the practices that underlie those materials. So there'll be overlap. A good curricular resource will have a lot of evidence-based practices in it, but it's not quite the same thing, right? These are the practices you want to make sure are actually happening to support the learning from the materials that you have adopted. So I want to start by really thinking about what kids at this grade level need. Some of you have seen this before. This is our NAEP national NAEP reading scores. I didn't pull out the Michigan ones specifically because it's a little sad right now, but we are going to make a lot of progress. But what I want to point out is it's not just us in Michigan. It's actually the whole country where the number of kids in the below basic category has increased by about 10% since we started doing this work together. I don't think it's, so we're not alone in facing some significant challenges post-COVID and also in the digital era in getting kids to read proficiently. In your packet, you will see a ReadWorks text called Copying Nature's Engineers. If you want to pull up your digital packet or flip to that in your packet, we're going to take a little time to look at that. That is that is the type of text that we want to be scaffolding students to read in their ZPD in 4th and 5th grade. It's called Copying Nature's Engineers. And so what I want you to do is take a look at the text and then take a look at what kids who are in those below basic and basic categories in the NAEP can do with a grade level text. This is from the White and colleagues NAEP Oral Reading Fluency Study. These are, so kids who are in the below basic category are the lowest 3 bars, the dark blue, red, and green bars. And kids who are scoring at the basic level are the purple bar. The top 2 are proficient and advanced. So in the first category there, passage reading, words correct per minute. Kids below basic are reading 100 words or less correctly per minute, whereas kids in the basic are reading 120, proficient and above 140 or more. So take a look at that and picture what it's like to read that at 1 word per second versus 2 words per second. Think about how far you could get if your teacher was like, okay, we're going to read this for 10 minutes. Same thing with word reading accuracy. Kids who are in 4th grade, who are reading in that below basic level, they are reading most of those words correctly. I want to highlight that, right? They are reading, even at the lowest tranche of the below basic level, kids are reading 82% of those words correctly. So that's still most of the words in a grade level text. So that's good. But it's a lot of words that they're still not recognizing in those below basic categories, versus kids who are proficient and advanced are recognizing almost every word in the text. So that's the goal, right? We want them to be able to recognize almost every word in that text. And then thinking about word reading fluency as well, thinking about reading with expression. Kids who are in this below basic or basic category in 4th grade are reading word by word or maybe phrase by phrase. When they go through a text like this. So, at your tables, take a minute to kind of look at this text and dive in here and think about all the different challenges that grade level text provides to students who are not already at that proficient or advanced level when they come into 4th and 5th grade. So there are several different, Heidi and Mesmer has a model of text complexity that highlights the different challenges that kids face when they're reading words. At the word level, we're thinking about the length of the words, how decodable or transparent they are, the frequency of the words, and also the difficulty of the meaning. Are these familiar words or not familiar words? At the sentence level, you think about the length of the sentence and the difficulty of the syntax. And at the discourse level, you think about the length of the text, how cohesive the text is, that do the ideas fit together, the structure of the text, and the content, the background, are my students familiar with this content? Do they have the background knowledge that they need? So go ahead and do a little table talk and think about what challenges you could see this text presenting to those readers in 4th and 5th grade who are not yet coming in with those proficient reading skills. Okay. Okay. Also think about the challenges this text will present to students who are reading at a proficient level, right? 4th and 5th graders are not done with their reading development. So think about what will be challenging for all of your students. Go ahead and continue. Okay. We are going to come back to this text several times in the next 90 minutes. But I want you to think about the challenges that you identified, because that is the gap. That is the ZPD, right? The gap between what we want students to be able to read and comprehend and learn from and what they are able to do. That's where those evidence-based practices come in. And it's really important. Even your curriculum will tell you what to read. It will even tell you how to teach it. But it won't necessarily tell you what you need to do to make sure that every student that in your class can benefit from the curricular materials and the readings that you want them to do. So this is something we're going to be talking about today. This is a chart actually from a book that Dr. Strong and I have just finished writing and turned into Guilford, called Teaching to the Text, which will be coming out next spring. So keep your eyes peeled for that in the future. But today we're going to talk about how the essentials are those evidence-based practices and how they can address those challenges and fill that gap for students. So you already know what the essentials are. They are classroom level tier 1 instructional practices that are both research-based and evidence-based. I'll show you the slide that explains what both of those things are. They are aligned to the science of reading, and they are to be used in conjunction, not instead of your high-quality instructional materials. They are not a curriculum, right? They don't replace your curriculum, they supplement your curriculum. And we're going to be talking about how those work together. And we had a lot to update the essentials. As you know, we went through a lot of high-quality research. We found all of the studies that met our criteria that were published from 2016 and on. You've seen those criteria before. Happy to go over them in the future. But basically, we did go back to the evidence, and we tried to and we made sure we found that evidence. Overall, we found more than 300 articles that had been published just in the last 10 years, distilled down to 90 studies that had implications for classroom practice, and 164 implications from those studies for the 4 or 5 essentials. So we have, as you know, you've seen the results, you know what those 10 essentials are. What we're going to talk about today is sort of the broad themes that emerged from working with this data and how those can inform your coaching. So there are 3 big shifts or thematic things that came out of studying those new research, delving really deeply into that research literature. And we're going to talk about key indicators for each of those shifts, ways you can see if they are happening, as well as how you can use your instructional memory mats to support your teachers in making each one of those 3 shifts. So you should have a packet that is also your instructional memory mat. We're going to go through all the materials in there and explain which resource and what the research is underlying those key resources. And then we're going to have some time to plan for intentional coaching in 4 or 5 next year. We're going to talk, so we're going to be thinking about the coaching cycle, and particularly the launch stage, how you want to approach one or more of these topics with the teachers that you work with. And we're going to be identifying our thinking traps. What are habitual ways of thinking that mean that we are not going to, that get in the way of doing the things we know we need to do. You also have this in your packet. Oops, sorry. That's our thinking traps. Mm-hmm. You also have this in your packet, which is a note taker. I'll give us time to work on that for each of the shifts and then thinking about it holistically at the end. So we're going to start with the 3 shifts. There are 3 main, and again, these are the 3 main themes that came out of that new hot off the presses research that we spent a year going through. One is strengthen foundational skills. One is address student needs through small group and differentiated instruction. We've had a head start on that this morning with Julia Lindsay. And then the third is teach literacy as a tool for building knowledge. So again, some of you have already participated in more in-depth training. This is going to be a quick overview of the shifts and with a focus on how we can support teachers in making them. So diving into shift 1, strengthen foundational skills. This is important because we want kids to be able to recognize print quickly and without effort in grades 4 and 5, so that they can acquire new vocabulary and knowledge through reading. This, in turn, helps in the comprehension of the next text they encounter. So when we think about foundational skills and talk to teachers about foundational skills, they almost always identify something like this, right? Those strands of Scarborough's reading rope: phonological awareness and phonemic awareness, letter sound knowledge, oral language, and vocabulary. And when we talk about foundational skills, we have to think about foundational to what? So when we're talking about in K3, we're often talking about the foundational skills that support word reading, and those are incredibly crucial and important. The foundational skills in 4 or 5 are a little bit more complex because we're talking about all of the foundational skills they need to support text reading. So we still absolutely need those word reading pieces, but the foundations that we are working on and shoring up for students at this stage are multisyllabic decoding, morphological knowledge, reading vocabulary, and reading fluency that can support grade level text reading. There's a bunch of arrows on this because they all work together. Morphology supports multisyllabic decoding and reading vocabulary. Reading vocabulary supports word recognition and reading fluency, and all of these things have to be working together in concert to support that text reading. Something that's really a key difference that we'll hit on a couple of times today is that kids in 4th and 5th grade are starting to learn new vocabulary from text. When we're talking about younger kids, we're often talking about oral vocabulary and how to build up their oral vocabulary, and that's very important for supporting their future reading comprehension. But now kids are in a place where they need to be learning words from the text that they read in order to build up their reading vocabulary and their academic vocabulary. So that's just a subtle but important difference in vocabulary instruction in this age. So this shift is about evidence-based instruction that supports the advanced word reading, automaticity, and reading fluency that kids need. Shifting from thinking about word work as explicitly phonics to thinking about it as merging with morphological instruction. Integrating word reading instruction with vocabulary instruction, and building and practicing these skills in challenging texts. So something I like to do with my pre-service teachers, which I encourage you to do with teachers too, is kind of sit down and take one skill at a time and look at it, make like a little T-chart comparing how that skill is represented in the K3 versus the 4 or 5 essentials. Especially if you have a teacher who's moved from one to the other, that can be a really helpful practice. I'm not going to go through all of them with you today because we don't have time, but they are in the slide deck, which will be shared. But so just making a little T-chart looking at word reading. In the K3, Essential 5 is focused on word reading, and we talk about explicit instruction and letter-sound relationships. Whereas in 4-5, it's in Essential 7, and we talk about intentional and ambitious efforts to build multisyllabic word recognition, vocabulary, and academic language to support comprehension and content knowledge. Same thing, reading fluency actually plays so we sometimes think of that as a K3 thing, but it actually plays a bigger role in 4-5 than we realize. In the K3 essentials, fluency is just built into the small group essential in Essential 3, whereas in 4-5, it stands out as its own essential. We want activities that build reading fluency and stamina with increasingly complex text to be a daily practice. So this matters because efficient word reading and foundational skills support reading with comprehension, which supports learning from text. And there's quite a bit of research that shows us what words those are that kids are going to need help with in grades 4 and 5. The Teaching Literacy podcast episode I mentioned is talking about a study that I did with students in a large urban charter school who were like the bottom 10 to 25th percentile on most standardized tests of reading, and the words that they had difficulty reading. Freddie Hebert has done a similar analysis with kids who score below basic on the NAEP, and she basically basically words can fall into these 4 different categories that the students have trouble with. Common words that are just 1 or 2 syllables, common words that are 3 or more syllables, rare new vocabulary that are 1 or 2 syllables and fairly morphologically transparent. So, for example, compound words. These are all words pulled from your text, by the way. So, like floodplain or wetlands, rare. 3 words that are rare, 3 or more syllables, and have derivational suffixes or derived forms of simpler words. And what the research shows is that even kids who are fairly behind in their, behind where we'd want them to be in the reading, are mostly having trouble with these harder words. They don't need a lot of hand-holding with simple 2-syllable words anymore, or common, frequently encountered 3-syllable words. What they need help with is this new vocabulary that they're encountering in the text. They need help with word recognition, and they need help with learning the meanings of those words. We've already talked today about some of the great research coming out of the University of Texas at Austin. This is one of those studies, also by the author's name is also Austin, so it's a little confusing. But this was a terrific study that influenced the way that we thought about the foundational skills shift, and I hope you can share. That 4th and 5th grades, it basically was an within subjects design that looked at different conditions for learning words presented to the same children. So within subjects design means that you try different things with the same kid and see what words they learn best depending on what method you use. So it's pretty cool. Every kid serves as their own control. It's a causal experimental method that can tell us a lot about what works best. And so what this study found is that kids in 4th and 5th grade, even those with dyslexia, learned to recognize new words better when that instruction was paired with word meaning instruction. So the WR there is word recognition instruction. The WR plus WM is word meaning instruction. And so this is at the pretest, before they got any instruction, you'll see how many words the kids could recognize. At the intermediate, after instruction, you can see that they recognized more words in the combined condition than in the word recognition alone condition. And post-test, you can see they also retained those words better. In memory. They were able to recognize words more efficiently and retain those words in memory better when they also talked about their word meanings, not just how to read those words. So when we're talking about foundational skills, we are talking about integrating at this point. So we're talking about focusing on words that are challenging enough, explicit instruction in word parts, word reading, and spelling, explicit instruction in word learning strategies, we'll talk about that in a minute, integrated word reading and word meaning instruction, regular supported fluency practice, and a high volume of text reading. So that is a brief overview of Shift 1, which is strengthening our foundational skills for 4 and 5. Let's do some table talk. Put this shift in your own words. What do you think is already happening in our 4 or 5 classrooms in Michigan, and what isn't happening yet? And what do you think, if it isn't happening yet, what's getting in the way? Are there thinking traps? Is there a lack of time? Do we not have the right materials? And what is needed? Do we need to support professional learning for teachers, bring in more materials, provide more tools and intentional coaching? So we'll take a few minutes to talk about this in our tables, and then we'll get runners to share and can share out. Mm-hmm. 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 How's it going? Okay. Okay. Yeah. Okay. It's hard to tell from the room because it's. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. They just looked at Yeah. We got to try to bring everybody up. Yeah. Yeah, they get like intimidated out of trying, and then like yeah, yeah,
An example is the kid who goes in and still doesn't know his sound in a chapbook, man. He like, that's big stuff. Oh, yeah. So,
yeah. They're still little, yeah. And they still need our help. Absolutely. Sorry, thanks for letting me listen in. I'm just trying to figure. I can never tell when I'm up at the front of the room and all the lights are shining on me if people are like connecting with what I'm saying. So I have to come down and like see what people are saying. There you are. I was like, I know you were here somewhere.
Yes, good. We have a question.
Yeah.
When you're talking about meaning, right? With fourth and we were all wondering this.
Yeah.
And the updated research that you showed, meaning the related to morphology, like prefixes, suffixes.
A lot of it was related to morphology
Okay.
because that helps with both.
Yes.
But basically, it was just basically the same words that they were using for word recognition. They also talked about what they meant, like basically double vocab instruction and word recognition instruction combined.
Okay.
And so, if it was morphologically transparent, then they would talk about the morphemes. But if it wasn't, they would just
They
talk
talk
about.
about the meaning of the word.
Yeah.
Okay. So helping kids understand the meaning, in addition to the word study, they're also learning the meaning of the word.
Yeah, yeah. Basically, so you know how a lot of curricula have like a vocab list and a
Yeah.
word reading list.
Yeah.
It's the idea is just combine them, like
Yeah.
have one list, like do the same instructional stuff, but with the same list of words.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Also, you'll be happy to know that I'm working with Charlotte Middle School teachers next week to help them understand Greek stuff, right? For grades 6, 7, 8.
Wonderful.
I'm so
That is
happy
so
that
great to
website
hear.
is so great about training, like resources, and then yeah. So anyway,
I'm so glad to hear that. I'm glad. Should I? Maybe I'll give it a few more minutes.
it's not something.
All right. So this is a big one. That's what I'm picking up from going around these tables. Thinking through about how our 4 or 5 teachers are going to think about these foundational skills, how they're already thinking about them, how to support them in the shift. I would love to hear from a couple. We have some runners. I'd love to hear from a couple of tables about some of the things that came up in your conversation, particularly any thinking traps or other obstacles that you think we could work on, that we might need to tackle this year. Anybody have a thinking trap or other obstacle to share? Or insight or thought? I had a good question at one table, which I'm happy to answer, about the Austin study. Basically, what was that word recognition and word meaning instruction? Basically, it was just typical vocabulary instruction. It was just using the same words for that vocabulary instruction that they were using for the word recognition instruction. So basically, just talking about what the words mean as well as how to read them out loud. right, did anybody have, I can't see. Oh, yes, okay.
Okay. Oh, that was really close. Our conversation was a little bit around the thinking trap of upper L, we don't do this, like they already know the words, we're just going to read the chapter mentality that sometimes happens, and how beneficial it can be when we address the fact that they don't know every word, or maybe don't know how to attack multisyllabic words, and what can we do for them, even if we choose 3 vocabulary words before we get started for that. Even if you're lesson 1 today, lesson 2 tomorrow, like we can't break that habit necessarily right away, but maybe we can teach them this new strategy that fits along with what they're comfortable with already, and kind of segue in from there.
Yeah, absolutely. The fact that that kids can read most of the words, right, 80 to 90% of the words, and that they can read most single and even 2-syllable words, kind of can mislead you into thinking they can read all the words. But the grade level texts have those big 3 or 4-syllable words in them that have those that need to be understood to understand the text. So, yeah. What else? So the one thinking trap is thinking, this is something for K3, this is not really my job, they don't really need it, we can just focus on comprehension. I love comprehension, not to say we shouldn't be focusing on comprehension too, we'll talk about that later. Other things, other obstacles or thinking traps? Yeah.
So we talked about talking with upper grade teachers. They know there's a need, it's just that like disconnect between knowing and doing, if we want to think about that. Also, I think, I don't know if this is considered a thinking trap, but when a student needs help, we're scaling back, like the definition of foundational skills, right? Mm-hmm. So like a student that's struggling at 4th and 5th grade, we're taking them back to CVC words or breaking it apart instead of using high-level text where we can scaffold, so.
Yeah, there's a continuum, right? And the same things we would give to a kid who is still in the partial or full alphabetic phase is not going to help a kid who's struggling in the consolidated phase, right? They're just different, they're different needs. Mm-hmm. Anything else that came up? Yeah.
They want you to stand up.
Oh, okay. So, sorry, everybody. We talked about the misalignment of what is going on in the classrooms. Like it's like something's taught only in isolation, and it feels like an add-on, so it's never applied, so the kids don't kind of make it automatic.
Absolutely, yeah. Having word reading instruction that is like separate, what we were talking about this table is that there are some curricula that have like a word reading list that kids work on in one part of the lesson, and then a spelling list that they work on in a different part of the lesson, and then a vocab list that they work on in a different part of the lesson. And what the Austin study shows is like we could have one list, right, and do all the things with those words, spelling, word recognition, and meaning, and that would be beneficial actually to the kids with the most needs and foundational skills. We don't need necessarily, and then obviously we need an opportunity to then apply it in challenging text, not just do all that work in isolation. So more integration of those skills. I meant to show this, but I forgot. In the front matter of the essentials, we talk very explicitly about how we do not want there to be 10 minutes every day for each essential. Like that's not how we're thinking about it. I don't think that's how we ever think about it, even in K3, but especially in 4-5. We're really thinking of these as integrated skills that are and evidence-based practices that are showing up throughout the day. And so you can do things that in an integrated way. You don't have to be like, okay, today now's our 10 minutes for vocabulary. We want these things to be happening around reading and writing goals involving those more complex texts. All right. Thanks. Thank you for sharing. Let's look at some of my thinking traps that I came up with. See if they overlapped with anything that you came up with. I hear this from the teachers I work with sometimes in my research that I would love to do this, but I have so many kids in my class who can't read, and that's generally not the case. I'm not saying there's not. That there aren't kids who need help. There are kids who need help. But the idea that they can't read at all is not accurate for most of those students, right? They can read a lot of words. They need help with that top 10 to 20% of difficult words. I also hear that only struggling readers need foundational skills instruction in 4-5, and that's not true either, because the words are getting harder. Even if you've mastered everything you've been taught through 3rd grade, the texts keep getting harder, the words keep getting harder, and you need to be learning more complex content information. So you're going to need more support to do that. And then finally, foundational skills is a K3 thing. I heard that several different places. That's not my job. That's supposed to be taken care of. That's not really my focus. I'm in this grade level because I love to talk about books, read and talk about books, and I do too. But to be able to read and talk about books, you have to be able to read the books, and the reading the words in the books is foundational. So when we're thinking about helping teachers with this shift, there are 3 things we want to look for, 3 sort of key indicators that this shift is starting to happen. And we're going to go through the resources in your memory mats because they're going to help you identify, they're going to help you fill in any gaps. The first indicator is that students have a routine for figuring out long words. They know what to do when they encounter a long word. If you have assessed any kids' oral reading fluency recently, then you know that there are lots of kids who don't know what to do. They come to a long word and they just sort of like freeze up and they don't, and they either make a guess or they skip it or they sort of mumble something. So this is actually a really great, this is something that we want to make sure all kids have, is a strategy for figuring out long words using some combination of syllables and morphemes. The indicator 2 is the students in the classroom have strategies from learning new vocabulary from what they are reading. They're not going to be able to learn all the new vocabulary they need to learn just from direct instruction. They need to be able to figure out what the new words that they're encountering in the text for the first time mean, and that's going to help them retain those words in memory. And then 3, students are engaging in regular fluency practice. So I'm going to walk through some of the things on your memory mat. At the very top of your memory mat is this figure, which highlights that how multisyllabic word reading instruction needs to be flexible. This is based on Bhattacharya's studies that she did with Ehri. Basically, she argues that you want to make sure that you're applying any sort of routines or strategies for reading long words in real words, not just learning the rules and following them, but trying to figure out real words in real text as often as possible. And that you can use syllables, absolutely. The rule that every syllable has 1 vowel is very helpful for getting kids started with multisyllabic word reading. But you could also use morphemes. And sometimes we find that morphemes are taught more as part of a vocabulary instruction, but it's actually a really helpful tool for multisyllabic decoding. Devin Kern's research covers this as well. So you want to make sure that kids have both strategies available to them. So the example here is that the word semi-automation. A kid who's trying to read it letter by letter is going to have to process and hold in memory 14 letter sound correspondences. A kid who's going syllable by syllable has to process 6 syllables. But somebody who's using morphemes only has to deal with 4 chunks. And what we know about kids in the consolidated alphabetic stage is that they can use those bigger pieces. And that will not only help them decode more effectively and more efficiently, it will also help them figure out what the word means. And so it's kind of a twofer. In particular, some morphemes are more stable in their pronunciation than just a syllable pattern. So for example, T-I-O-N, has anybody ever heard a kid say tion when they're trying to read words? Yeah. So they need to just know that every time they see it, it's shun. That's just the way it is. It's just pronounced that way. That's it. And that will help them not only understand that it's a derived form of a word that turns a verb into a noun, but it will also help them pronounce it more quickly every time they encounter it. So there are some more. So we're going to talk about this more in my breakout session tomorrow for those of you who are coming. But I wanted to take a look, pull out some of these words. I already pulled out some of the hard words in this passage, and think about this. Think about how you, as a proficient reader, would read these words if it was the first time you encountered them in the text. Is it more productive or more efficient to use a syllable approach or a morpheme approach? What would that look like for kids who have different levels of morphological knowledge? So just at your table, take a little bit of time to think about how to approach these words. All right. In the interest of time, I'm going to keep going, but I'm sure in your conversations it's become clear that some words are some words are more easily read using that syllable strategy, which is very common in a lot of curricular materials, but some are more efficiently read using a morpheme strategy. And so knowing what your students know about morphological knowledge, you can help them be flexible and figure out how to take different approaches to reading words based on what they know. I think you'll see that these are not easy words, right? These are the biodiversity, right? Like that, these are words that have a lot of different things going on. And sometimes the morphemes and the syllables line up, like in floodplain, and sometimes they don't, like in habitats. So really having both strategies at your disposal is going to be the most effective and efficient way to read these longer words. And so on your memory mat, you'll see as a support for indicator 1, a section that has routines for reading long words that are pulled directly from evidence-based causal research studies. These are also summarized in this terrific piece that you've had by Kearns and Whaley that I've talked about a number of times. But basically, there is every syllable has one vowel, which is a really great 6-step strategy that kids can get, that is great for getting kids started on thinking about syllables and word parts. Best is a little bit more truncated for when kids are getting a little more comfortable with this. And then there's a strategy from my own work with Read, Stop, Write that we use to kind of take a more morpheme first approach to make it a little bit more efficient. And then you also see a strategy for helping kids learn to spell these multisyllabic words pulled from the IES practice guide by Sharon Vaughn and others, because spelling the words is going to help them remember them and hold them in memory as well. So we don't want to forget about spelling just because kids are getting older. So that's on your memory mat. What you'll also find is a word part learning routine to help learn the morphemes and the word parts that students need to support this sort of long word decoding based on Jessica Toss's work. And she's the author of Word Connections. She is also at UT Austin. So we have a lot of UT Austin going on today. So that's indicator 1. Indicator 2 is about vocabulary instruction, making sure kids have strategies for learning the meanings of new words they encounter in their texts. And you'll see that there are a range of strategies that are evidence-based. And the reason that the reason we included these strategies is in part based on a really terrific meta-analysis that came out in the past couple of years by Miranda Fitzgerald and Gina Cervetti at U of M, among others, that highlighted that teaching words one at a time, direct instruction in vocabulary does teach those words, but does not improve vocabulary over time. Instruction in vocabulary learning strategies and word learning strategies also may or may not improve vocabulary over time, but it seems more promising because it offers kids the opportunity to do it independently. Basically, the idea is we cannot directly teach all the words that kids need to know to have a robust vocabulary, but the word learning strategies give us the best possible approach. So these are strategies including using morphological pieces, thinking about cognates and other words that you know and making connections between words, as well as looking for context clues to support learning vocabulary. And so if you think about the words that we were just trying to read, these are also really key vocabulary words for understanding the text. So the idea that these are two separate strands of instruction can go away in this grade level. And then, of course, indicator 3 is fluency practice. Again, this is something that I think is often mistaken as a K3 thing, but there was quite a bit of research that came out, as particularly meta-analyses and syntheses, on the effects of reading fluency practice, especially for older readers. Melanie Kuhn had a nice overview of all of the fluency studies, including classic approaches like the fluency-oriented reading instruction, and also wide fluency-oriented reading instruction. And so those sort of sequences are highlighted here. We pulled those from from the Kuhn review of those original studies. And so you can see two different ways of sort of organizing fluency practice over time. And then you can also see at the top the different types of fluency support that you can use. I often have teachers in 4 or 5 tell me that they aren't going to do choral reading, or they aren't going to do echo reading, or they're not going to model fluent reading for their students because they're too old and it's going to be too babyish. But There is evidence that that these fluency supports can help kids access texts that they wouldn't be able to read independently. In particular, before doing any sort of repeated reading, there's a lot of evidence for doing what's called a passage preview with kids at this age level, which is when they listen to the passage and follow along reading the words. So not a read aloud, but a passage preview before doing that repeated reading. There's also been a new meta-analysis highlighting highlighting the various types of choral reading supports and how effective those are by Jake Downs. So there's lots and lots of excellent ways we can support kids in getting that fluency practice, even in texts that are a little bit too hard for them to read independently. And then finally, this is probably my favorite study. I talk about this study all the time. This is a Deborah Reed study focused on the effects of partner reading fluency routines with both the repeated reading and what she calls varied practice. So you've probably heard me talk about this one before because I love it. But what I love about it is that it shows two different fluency routines that can be done with partners who are only in fourth and fifth grade. So in this study, she was able to effectively set up partner reading routines where they were giving each other that important corrective feedback. Julia talked a few times about how kids need corrective feedback to improve. That's something that shows up in all the fluency meta-analysis too. If kids are just reading the same text multiple times and making the same mistakes each time, it doesn't really help. They need corrective feedback. It's really hard to get that from a teacher, but Deborah Reed's work shows that they can get it from each other if they are provided with the appropriate scaffolding. And she compared two different conditions. One was repeated reading of the same text, and one was reading three different texts with overlapping words. She called that varied practice. The varied practice condition was slightly better, it was even better than the repeated reading, but of course they were both very effective. So we pulled this partner reading routine directly from the study and made it available because it's a great opportunity for kids to work collaboratively. It's something that they can do while the teacher is doing something else if they've learned this routine and can practice together. So that's shift one. I want to give you a few minutes to do some table talk before we move into shift two about thinking about that first part of the coaching cycle, the launch. How would you launch a coaching cycle focused on an explicit word recognition routine like Echelon Best, the Read Stop Write one, or the support for spelling routine, or a fluency routine? If one of those things isn't happening yet, how would you launch a cycle based on those? What would be your primary focus? What kind of baseline data would you want? And how would you set expectations? So let's take a few minutes to talk about shift one. Yeah, absolutely.
So I just read this meta-analysis that we were talking about during our coaching that said that 4 rereads, is that a thing?
So yes, 4 reads are generally better. This study only used 3, and they still had pretty good effects. So yes, I do research in middle school too, and we still do choral reading and partner reading. And it is helpful, especially in sort of like a reading intervention class. By 9th grade, we find it's not helpful anymore. But in middle school, a lot of kids still benefit from that support. And then, first, teachers don't want to do it, but kids will do it. They get used to it. So. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. What we found is that when we got up to 9th grade, it didn't make sense anymore. We tested it in 6th through 9, and what we found, but the choral reading and especially the partner reading routines were still really valuable, and but it allows you to have access to a harder text than you could read independently. Right. So, yeah, of course. I like the standing up. I'm going to tell everyone to do that next time. Just stand up, get your blood flowing. It's a good idea. It's a good idea. All right. Okay. Take a minute to make a few notes on your note-taking document before we move on to shift 2. I got I got one really good question, and I overheard a really good conversation over here that I'm going to pop out for a minute. Somebody asked me, don't the meta-analyses say that kids need to be reading text at least 4 or 5 times in a fluency building routine? The meta-analyses do say that that is better than reading a text only 3 times. They also say that it's better if kids can read to an adult and get feedback from adults. That's all, yes, if you have that ability to provide that level of fluency support, that would be a more effective intervention, especially for your struggling readers. However, if we're talking about tier 1 instruction, something that you can do with all of your students, I think the READ study provides a really good model, right? There's only 3 text readings, kids reading to each other, and they still had positive effects. So I think basically it's, yes, there's an ideal world in which kids who need a lot of support are getting more direct support, and that would be something you could do in a small group, right? But if you're just having kids read to each other a few times a week with a carefully scripted protocol and they know what to do and how to offer each other feedback, that's still going to have benefits. So that's why we included it, not because a meta-analysis will tell you what is ideal, but not everybody's going to be able to do that as part of their tier 1 instruction every time. So I thought that was a very doable model that I was so happy to include. I also heard talk over here about how sometimes we think that texts for fluency practice have to be easier than the grade level texts. And I think that is kind of a misunderstanding. The fluency supports allow you to read something harder than you could read independently, especially if you're doing a level of support like passage preview, if you're if you're partnering kids so that the stronger reader reads first, if you're doing something like choral reading, that's a way to access grade level texts that a student wouldn't be able to read on their own. So if fluency practice doesn't have to be poems or songs or like easy things that kids could read independently. And in fact, that's not what was used in the READ study or a lot of the studies that were used for in the meta-analyses. All right, let's move on to shift 2. Shift 2 is going to sound familiar because it's about small group and differentiated instruction, which we talked about all morning. But in particular, we have a lot of, this is an area that is not well understood. So this is a quote from a study of differentiated instruction. Whether differentiated instruction is, while differentiated instruction is not a boondoggle of massive proportions, it is not a silver bullet. That is, not all approaches to differentiation produce positive results. So let's talk about this. Small groups are not just a K-3 thing. There have been many excellent studies of small group interventions in grades 4 and 5. And Dr. Strong isn't here, so I'm not going to do, you're not going to get the tutorial on effect sizes, but the effects are pretty good, is what I'll say, for small group intervention in the meta-analyses. Overall cooperative and collaborative activity, small group learning produces good effects, especially in more structured and prescriptive, small group small group procedures. There's plenty of evidence for small groups, and in particular, if we look at small group instruction delivered by teachers or teaching assistants, both are pretty effective. And there's also plenty of evidence for differentiated instruction, differentiating by content, by process, or by product. and particularly strong effects for word reading. So there's a lot of overlap in what we're talking about in the shifts here. Everything that we're talking about as an instructional practice that's appropriate for shift 1 or that's appropriate for shift 3 is also something you can do in small groups at just more intensity. So they're not separate instructional or evidence-based practices for one group or the other. So if you'll notice, if you look into the, if you could look at the essentials, we have one whole essential in the 4-5 based on about small group instruction, but there's quite a bit of overlap with the other ones. So for example, activities that promote reading fluency are often very beneficial in a small group setting, as well as discussion-based cooperative and collaborative small groups, such as literature circles, quality talk, that kind of thing. So what this looks like in 4-5, it's not that different from what you're seeing in K3, but basically you're using assessment data, just like Julia Lindsay talked about it. I know Dr. Truckenmiller is going to talk about this too, using assessment data to create flexible groups, designing, delivering differentiated instructional content, selecting texts that serve the purpose of the lesson rather than differentiating by text level, and making sure that kids are getting timely and corrective feedback. I know Julia and Lindsay talked about this too, but they're excellent, but generally studies of small group work in 4-5 have kids who are not working with the teacher rereading texts for fluency and comprehension. So that pair work that we just talked about for fluency could be something that kids do when other kids are in small group. Text-based written responses to support learning, or self-selective reading with some sort of accountability. Independent reading is generally not as helpful if there's not some sort of accountability mechanism. So thinking about the small group work and this differentiation, of course you can differentiate without small group and have undifferentiated small groups, but really trying to bring these two things together in the shift. Do a little bit of table talk. What is this? What is already happening? And what isn't happening yet? What is getting in the way? And what do you think is needed to move this forward in 4-5? Slowly, so I'm going to keep going here because we did have so much rich discussion of small group work this morning, and of course there's going to be a breakout around small group tomorrow as well with Dr. Lindsay. But here are some, I know she already talked about some of these, but these are some of the thinking traps that I encounter with teachers in small group work. Only some kids need small group instruction, thinking about kids who are behind. Differentiation always being down, not providing stretch opportunities for kids who are actually doing just fine, not making sure everybody gets their needs met at some point during the day, and thinking about differentiating the books rather than the instruction or the skills that we're targeting. So our key indicators when we're looking at shift 2 is we're looking for multi-component interventions. So not necessarily just in a 10-minute block where we're just doing word reading, although some kids will need that. Database decision-making and differentiation, which I know you'll hear more about later today. And targeted tier 2 support focused on what kids need. So if you go to your memory mats, what you'll see is that there are lots and lots of multi-component interventions. There's a lot of great research that shows that for older students, interventions that target both foundational skills and comprehension together are more effective than interventions that just focus on one or the other. And there's lots of studies, there are several different studies, including this overview by Stephanie Alateba and this overview by Donegan and Wanzik that show that those are more effective. So here's another Sharon Vaughn study highlighting multi-component interventions for older students that can support both foundational skills and comprehension. So what you'll see here is an example of a targeted intervention from my own work, Read, Stop, Write, but there are many different multi-component interventions that integrate the foundational skills with the comprehension and with the writing supports. We know that writing is incredibly important, and integrating reading and writing is more effective than teaching them separately, and that writing about text supports comprehension. as well as writing skills. And I wanted to highlight text structures for supporting informational text here. There's quite a bit of research. Several meta-analyses actually came out about text structure for supporting comprehension of informational texts in the last 10 years, but also supporting students' ability to write using informational text structures. So that understanding how informational texts are organized is something that can support both reading and writing and that integration. So if you take a look at our text, think about what text structure you think this text has. Do a quick turn and talk. And how that would help you organize the information. So some of you may be running into a problem that we have with text structure sometimes, which is that real texts don't fit perfectly into boxes, but I personally think if I were teaching this, I would use a problem and solution structure. I don't know if everybody else agrees. Kay Wijukumara's work with the CAT framework focuses very intensely on using text structures to support reading comprehension. And there's lots of research that shows that it can support students writing at this age level as well. All right, then indicator 2, database decision making. This is a whole thing, but there is an excellent meta-analysis explaining how the effects of database decision making. Basically, focusing on different reading domains. Code focus tend to be a little bit more effective, but using decision making procedures around progress monitoring frequency, criterion mastery for adjusting instruction, and standardized assessment tools like DIBBLES. We've got a lot of DIBBLES happening, so this is an excellent opportunity for database decision making, and using that information to adjust the instruction. So there are several earlier today, Julia mentioned the differentiated reading instruction model that Sharon Walpole has. There are several different studies that look at the effectiveness of that when built into an overall Tier 1 curriculum, and basically highlighting how you can use assessment data to target your foundational skills lesson and differentiated support very, very narrowly to the very specific skills that kids are learning. And generally, there's research that has studied that as part of the whole curriculum, but also research that has looked at this as a small group intervention in just an 18-day summer school program that Dr. Strong has done out at Buffalo and has found positive effects as well. So this model in your memory mat shows you how to differentiate small group instruction based on the data that you have. And what you will also see here is that, and so that's moving on, and then moving on to indicator 3, which is targeted Tier 3 support. So, Tier 2 support. So there will be kids who need very specific foundational skill support, like we've been discussing, and there will be kids who need very specific comprehension support. We haven't talked about that as much, but that's absolutely in the essentials as well. And so we've pulled resources for thinking about that targeted Tier 2 support from both the IES practice guide by Sharon Vaughn and Jessica Toss's work. You'll see the same practices are showing up in Tier 1 and Tier 2 because kids in Tier 2 often just need more and more structure and more support in their Tier 2 instruction. So there are lots of different programs that you can pull from. Here's some comprehension supports, also pulled from the practice guide, and some research by Fuchs and al. And then there's plenty of research really highlighting that what we want is to make sure that our Tier 1 instruction and our Tier 2 instruction are aligning, that we're using the same types of approaches, the same vocabulary. We don't want kids to get confused because we're doing something completely different in Tier 1 and Tier 2. So we're not so all of these practices can be used in small group. They can be used in a differentiated data-based way to support kids who need that extra help. But the key thing is that there's consistency across the two. So let's move on into shift. Let's do some table talk about shift 2, thinking about how you could launch a coaching cycle focused on integrating reading and writing better. That's something I think we can all work on. Or providing differentiated small group work, thinking about how you might build it around an article like Nature's Engineers. All right. Go ahead and make some notes on shift 2 on your note taker. I hate to keep moving, but I only have 10 minutes to get us through our last shift, so we're going to keep going into shift 3. which I know everyone is going to be, no one's going to be surprised that this is extant in the literature. Nell Duke has been talking about this for a long time. When we comprehend, we gain new information that changes our knowledge, which is available for later comprehension. So in that positive, virtuous cycle, knowledge begets comprehension, which begets knowledge, and so on. We've been talking about this in the Coaching Network for a long time because this is one of Nell's favorite topics and one of her focuses in research. But we want to focus on knowledge because of that virtuous cycle. Research showing that knowledge is one of the most important background knowledge or prior knowledge is one of the most important contributors to reading comprehension. But where do they get that knowledge? They get it from reading, right? We want them to be able to build, so it's a cycle. It's not that they need prior knowledge. I think prior knowledge can sometimes be a misnomer for teachers. It's that they're building knowledge through reading, which helps them do more reading, and that's a virtuous cycle. So Cervetti and Hebert have highlighted 5 knowledge-building practices, making sure that kids are reading a lot with the support that they need to make sense of those texts, giving students real reasons to read and write. So we're highlighting that there's quite a bit of increased emphasis on content and disciplinary learning in the elementary grades, especially these upper grades. So just a couple of key studies. Peng et al. Meta-analysis looked at comprehension strategies and found that teaching more comprehension strategies wasn't necessarily better, and no one comprehension strategy was like the silver bullet, but the effects of strategies were most pronounced and only consistent when background knowledge instruction was also included. So comprehension and knowledge are not, it's not one or the other. We want them to be integrated. We want to be doing both all the time. There's also a couple of fantastic, there was an integrative review and meta-analysis by Wang and colleagues focusing on integrated literacy and content area instruction, finding that there were significant effects for both vocabulary and comprehension, including standardized comprehension outcomes, which is very rare for any sort of intervention to have standardized comprehension outcomes. So when we're looking at this, we're really thinking about moving away from a traditional literacy-first instructional model, which is focused on teaching skills and picking the words and the text that we need to teach those skills, towards an integrated model where we're focused on the knowledge we want to build and picking the texts and the words and the things that we need to support that knowledge building and those goals. So in the essentials, you'll see that this shift, like the other ones, cuts across all the essentials, but in particular, it picks up on higher order discussion as a way to build knowledge, and writing as a way to build knowledge. There are aligns with many other essentials as well. So this looks like, in classrooms, doing literacy activities for meaningful purposes, lots of academic and vocabulary language instruction, conceptually rich text and text sets, activating and building knowledge before, during, and after reading, higher order discussions, and writing. So very quick table talk about this. We have to keep going. Sorry, I'm going to run out of time. All right, and just to keep us moving along here are some of the thinking traps that I encounter. This learning to read, reading to learn dichotomy still exists in many classrooms where you think kids aren't ready for this until they are already proficient readers. Thinking that doing knowledge building instruction is going to be too hard for some population of students. Or thinking that informational reading and writing is boring and not engaging for students. Obviously, none of those things are true. One of those things but we need to get past them to do this work. So what we're looking for in this shift are the key indicators are opportunities to build knowledge through reading and writing, not just reading and writing for the sake of writing, but reading and writing about stuff. Vocabulary instruction in context, and those higher order discussions of the new material. So, number one, building knowledge. The whole first page of your memory mat under Shift 3 is based on one of the studies that was pulled out of the meta-analysis I just discussed, based on concept-oriented reading instruction. So, Guthrie et al. Focused on this. Was an intervention that showed that by focusing on the knowledge building and doing reading instruction based around specific concepts and ideas, students were able to improve word recognition, reading comprehension, and knowledge of the topic area, which was in this case ecological knowledge, and that this was equally effective for both lower and higher performing students. You'll also see this before, during, and after framework pulled from Carol Connor's work with content area literacy instruction, or the CALI framework, which are excellent tools for getting this building knowledge going in your classrooms. So here's just an overview of what the zoom in on that before, during, and after reading framework. And then you also see resources for building vocabulary in context. I talked a little bit about that meta-analysis that showed that word learning strategies are more productive long-term, like for building vocabulary, than direct instruction in vocabulary. I wanted to highlight this systematic review by Wright and Cervetti that highlights that teaching words directly is helpful for reading comprehension of the text that has those words. So you're not going to build overall reading comprehension by teaching words directly, but you are going to support comprehension of specific texts by providing embedded vocabulary instruction of the words in those texts. And you're also going to get more value for that vocabulary instruction if you're able to teach texts in conceptually related sets. Text sets help build knowledge. Gina Cervetti has a lot of work around this, including a brand new study that just came out this year. They help build that knowledge, but they also help reinforce that vocabulary learning from texts. Counting the words again and again in conceptually related text sets improves vocabulary knowledge over teaching disparate vocabulary and in disparate texts. And then finally, you'll see support for this higher order discussion pulled from the Quality Talk framework by Murphy et al. What they found was by initiating and using this framework, that with students in grades 4 and 5, the teachers were able to move away from really teacher or directed discussion. Oftentimes when we want teachers to have more discussion, they end up just doing most of the talking themselves. By having this framework in place, over time, students were able to do more of the talking, and that it was able to support their comprehension of the text that they were talking about as well. So that framework is included here also. So I only have 4 minutes, but do a quick turn and talk about Shift 3 and how you might want to, what you might think about if you are launching a coaching cycle on reading and writing to build knowledge, or higher order discussions. Both of those things I think are often missing in our 4-5 classrooms. Mm-hmm. All right, and just to wrap things up, I want you to jot some notes down on your note taker, and I want you to think about, take it with you, think about, keep using it to jot your notes down. Think about what you see as the overlap in these 3 shifts. Because just like we don't want to think about each essential as a separate thing that we're trying to get teachers to do, there's also quite a bit of overlap in these 3 shifts, and skills and evidence-based practices that fall into that overlap. So one way to think about this is vocabulary, writing, and fluency are showing up across these shifts and across the essentials. So those evidence, and if you have an evidence-based routine for fluency, that's something that you can use to strengthen foundational skills and incorporate into your small group work. For example, if you have vocabulary instruction that's going to support foundational skills and your literacy, using literacy as a tool for building knowledge. Same thing, there are other things that could go into these Venn diagrams, thinking about the instructional practices that you want to see happen that will cut across these three shifts and really improve our instruction overall. And then you're going to need to think about the data and the indicators and the practices you want to focus on, and prioritize. Always the hardest thing to do. There's so much great research, and there's so many great things that we want to do. We can't do it all at once. We're going to have to pick something. So just to return to where we started, the literacy essentials are here to support you. They're tools that can help you bring these evidence-based practices into 4 or 5 classrooms all over the state. And we desperately need it because we have a challenge ahead of us. Kids are not reading as much at home anymore. This is a study of 13-year-olds, but today's 4th and 5th graders are tomorrow's 13-year-olds. They're not going to get this reading at home if we're not getting it at school, right? So we have to think about how we're scaffolding them and getting them enough reading practice in grades 4 and 5 so that they will hopefully be in that 14% of kids who read for fun, but also so they have the skills and the stamina to do the reading that's going to be expected of them in the secondary grades. So to return to thinking about the ZPD as an opportunity to scaffold and provide the support kids need to read difficult texts and get that practice. You know, the essential practices and the coaching and evidence-based practices are there to close that delta, right? The gap between what we want students to do and what they are doing now. That's where we come in. That's where evidence-based practices help support kids to get to that level. So the ZPD is actually us. We do it. We make those evidence-based practices happen in the class. So we get to fill in that gap. We aren't finding the kids' ZPD, we are filling the kids' ZPD by providing the instruction that they need to do the things we want them to do. So another way, more Michigan-centric way to think about this is that we are the bridge. We are the bridge between this huge body of research and the practice we want to see in the classrooms. We are the bridge between the excellent policies and support and resources that are being provided to us statewide now and what's actually happening in classrooms. You are the bridge that can help that money and that time and that effort make a difference. And you are the bridge between the students and the texts that they want to read, that we want them to be able to read, the opportunities that we want them to have going forward as proficient adult readers someday. So you are the Mighty Mac. Thank you for all this work that you're doing. I appreciate you always having me here, and I appreciate the time, and that you are able, I appreciate all the opportunities I have to work with you and support you in your work along the way. So thank you so much for having me.